President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu made quite a few waves at a pair of press conferences in Washington, D.C. yesterday. Were a bunch of topics really inflammatory and causing lots of anxiety in many parts of the world, especially in the Middle East and even here in the United States. We're going to zero in on this show on some of the things he said that could potentially result in war with the United States and Iran. And we'll see where that's going to go. And are we going to be able to anywhere from having lots of peace and wonderful tranquility, or is there going to be a war to prevent nuclear weapons? It's really a lot of mess. And to try and untangle some of this difficulty, we have a new guest on today. We're delighted to have Dr. Sumantra Maitra, who is the Director of Research and Outreach at the American Ideas Institute, a senior fellow at the Center for Reviving America, Renewing America, and then a fellow at the Royal Historical Society in London, also the author of Sources of Russian Aggression. We may have you back on to talk about that one too. We have touched on that topic quite a bit. But listen, we're just delighted to have you back on today, or have you on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, listen, let's just dive in because, man, is there a lot to talk about here. The issue of Iran and Trump and all the Middle East really has been a hallmark of his administration going back to 2016 when he was first elected. And then as soon as he took office in early 2017, he talked almost from the beginning that he was going to get us out of the, quote, disastrous nuclear deal that President Obama had done with the JCPOA. And then in May of that year, he got out of it, which just kind of really started a disentangling of what had been a contained issue. If we were actually trying to prevent Ukraine from getting a nuclear weapon, it seemed to go in the opposite direction of that. But then sort of went into mothballs as during the 4 years of the Biden administration. Now here it comes back up front and center today. So first of all, let's take a look at what Trump had actually said. Not related to the nuclear issue, but very much related to Iran, about what would happen if he was assassinated.
And why say that you're unhappy to sign it if it's Iran and their proxies who have threatened to retaliate against you and your team by killing you guys for taking out Soleimani?
Well, they haven't done that, and that would be a terrible thing for them to do. Not because of me. If they did that, they would be obliterated. That'll be the end. I've left instructions. If they do it, they get obliterated. There won't be anything left. And they shouldn't be able to do it. And Biden should have said that, but he never did. I don't know why, lack of intelligence perhaps. But he never said it. If that happens to a leader, or close to a leader, frankly, if you had other people involved also, you would call for total obliteration of a state that did it. That would include Iran.
Okay. Well, that's some pretty strong language there. First of all, what do you make of this threat? Because it's been talked about here and there, and there's even been some claims that there have been some attempted assassination efforts by Iran. How credible do you think those reports are?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me. Trump's first team, like the first time when he was there, his Middle East team was very different than the one that we have now. There has always been questions about what kind of information he is getting at the end of the day. What kind of, as you obviously know, like for those who don't, like there is a raw intel data, and then there's an inference or an interpretation of the data, which is then presented to the president. It could be. There could be data, for example, to say that Iran is interested in creating trouble. Iran is interested in creating some kind of problems for the United States or for the president. Now, whether that's a hard, tangible, action plan that you then present to the president and like, hey, here's the thing. This is what was planned. Here is how your life was in danger. We don't really know. We are not privy to those. What the intel is, the U.S. intelligence is gathering and what kind of things they're seeing themselves. But so far, at least in media or, outside the scope of debate, we haven't really seen any tangible proof that there has been an attempted assassination attempt that was made on the president, which was done at the behest of Iran. Now, obviously, Iran is not a benevolent actor in the Middle East, but that the world is not a nice place. Like there are different countries which we have a lot of issues with, but that doesn't mean that they are a rival or an enemy.
What do you make of the claim that because of we assassinated at Trump's behest in 2020, I think it was January 2020, the assassinated Soleimani. He actually did that, and Iran said they were going to retaliate. How serious do you think Iran is at actually retaliating like that?
I think we have seen so far an exact opposite. We have seen an interest in Iran to reach out to the United States to kind of tone down the confrontational rhetoric that usually often comes out from the region. For example, if you remember, when there was this tit-for-tat missile attacks in the Middle East with Israel, there was an outreach from the Iranian side to the US government saying, by the way, this is the time period, within which we are going to strike or attempt to strike Israel. And then after that, we would consider this matter closed. So usually if there is a rival state which is determined to create, your life miserable, they don't usually give you timelines that it's almost like a WWE program. Like this is fixed, by the way, like
analogy.
Yeah. So I think, again, we are not privy to the conversation that the president is having now, but from what can be gathered from the news that we see is there is an interest in Iran to kind of tone down the rhetoric. And the president himself is a little contradictory at times about what he really wants to do. If his worry is the original deal with Iran was bad, he's also saying he wants a better deal with Iran. If he says that, he will obliterate Iran once he dies, if due to an assassination, he's also at the exact same tweet or like the very next tweet or Truth Social is saying like, no, we don't want a war with Iran. It's greatly exaggerated. We want a peaceful deal with Iran where they can be a peaceful nuclear power and nuclear energy. The region would be great. So I think that's kind of like a contradictory instinct. I think its basic instinct is to have a rapprochement with Iran, have kind of like an equilibrium in the Middle East. But obviously, there are lots of moving variables here, including Israel. So we don't really know where that might lead to.
Yeah, and we're going to see how that variable plays in. Indeed,
that's right.
I want to look at one of the things that Trump has. One of the first things he reinitiated, just signed an executive order to this effect about returning maximum pressure. Now, as you watch this clip here, where he signs the document and then explains some of what it's intended to do, it's a bit odd. And I want to get your view on the backside of this. What exactly this maximum pressure is supposed to produce?
Next, sir, this is a national security presidential memorandum that seeks to impose maximum pressure on the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Many of these provisions are similar to actions that your administration took during your first administration. The basic idea here is to have every department and agency, or many departments and agencies in your government attempt to sanction and control Iranian activities, particularly relating to the Iranian nuclear program and the Iranian export of terrorism through support of various proxy groups abroad. And the intent here is to give you all of the possible tools to, I'd say, engage with the Iranian government to ensure that going forward they are less of a malign actor on the world stage.
So this is one that I'm torn about. Everybody wants me to sign it. I'll do that. It's very tough on Iran, but hopefully we're not going to have to use it very much. We will see whether or not we can arrange or work out a deal with Iran, and everybody can live together, and maybe that's possible, and maybe it's not possible. So I'm signing this, and I'm unhappy to do it, but I really have not so much choice because we have to be strong and firm, and I hope that it's not going to have to be used in any great measure at all. It'd be great if we could have a Middle East and maybe a world at total peace.
I found one of the interesting things of that that he said there, and whoever handed him that document to explain some of the things that were in it, he said the objective was to make Iran, quote, less of a malign actor, also to control Iranian activities. And that's so inspecific, because if you're talking about bringing pressure on somebody and sanctions and all that stuff, it's supposed to be to accomplish a specific item, i.e., if the the actions are done the way that we want them to be the other side, then the sanctions would come off so that they had motivation to actually do that. But I didn't really hear in there, and maybe you can understand something better than I did, what these sanctions are supposed to accomplish.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, usually when you're putting pressure on an international actor, you have as an alternative a set of deliverables that you can then decide that, okay, these are the boxes that needs to be ticked, and if that happens, then we're going to take the pressure out. There was no such thing in this case. I think the most interesting thing of that clip that you played, and which is obviously getting played in social media all the time, is this is completely opposed to the president's own instinct. So on one hand, he's getting an executive order, which is a mirror of the executive order that was done in his first administration, which was filled with Iran hawks, which hopefully this administration is not. His personal instinct is obviously on an equilibrium with Iran. He understands that he won as a peace president, that the American wars in the Middle East has not been beneficial for the United States. And also, Iran is a much bigger actor compared to Iraq or Libya. The Iranian state is surrounded by mountains. It's with almost like 80 million people. It's a big state. Like that war with Iran is not going to be easy. He understands that, and he doesn't want to follow through what the U.S. did in Iraq or Libya or Syria. But also, he's like, the funny thing about that clip was like, yeah, I don't really want to do it, but I have to. And I'm thinking, like, Mr. President, you probably do not have to do that. Like, if you don't want to sign and put maximum pressure on Iran, like, you have a right to say that to the people who are advising you on that one. I think he was sold the idea that you have to be tough on Iran, otherwise, Iran would do all these kind of things. And he mentioned two things. One, Iranian nuclear program needs to be called and stopped. And second, Iran shouldn't be a sponsor of terrorism across the region. The first one is a tangible, understandable, deliverable, idea. Like Iran shouldn't be a nuclear actor. Fine. Okay. That is something which I understand. The second one is, as you mentioned, extremely vague. If Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism in the region, how are we measuring it? Is that being measured by the power of Hamas or Hezbollah or Houthis in Yemen? Are we able to understand how much Iran is reacting when they're funding all these elements as to acting just to create a destabilized Middle East? Is Iranian reaction of funding the Houthis a response to the Israeli war in Gaza? Like, all of these questions brings about more questions, which we don't have any answer to. From what we have, sorry.
There is one question that I've got. Maybe you can answer, and I wonder if, just kind of to the best of your ability here, kind of characterize how much of a threat is Iran. What is all this we're trying to do aside from the nuclear issue? Because, like you said, that's kind of a separate category, which we'll actually get back to in a second. But in terms of the regional dynamics, how much of a problem is Iran? Is it a threat to American national security? Is it a nuisance? Is it just one of many players? How would you characterize Iran?
Well, your second part of the question was the answer to the first part. Like, when you try and figure out like whether Iran is a threat, we have to understand who is it a threat to. Like, is Iran a threat to Saudi Arabia? Is Iran a threat to Israel or to the United States? Now, I, sitting in the United States, can categorically state that Iranian influence is not that big of a threat to U.S. interests in the United States. To U.S. interests in the Middle East, maybe, potentially. To Israeli interests and Saudi Arabia and other states in the Gulf, absolutely. So, depending on how you're drawing policy, you can then answer the question: is Iran a threat to the United States? No. Is Iran capable of invading the United States? No. Is Iranian Navy or Air Force at par with the United States? No. Is Iranian GDP at par with any of the states surrounding Iran? No. Iranian population and the Shia majority that it holds is 1/4 or 1/5 of the other states and the other powers which are surrounding Iran, which are, if not hostile, not aligned with Iran anyway. The fundamental power that Iran has in that region are related to the three non-state actors: Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Hamas faced a lot of problems in Gaza. They're not in any way a massive threat to the region other than a nuisance to Israel. Hezbollah chose not to go to war with Israel because it understands that that is not a war that would be beneficial for either sides. It's going to be a massive mass casualty event. The Houthis are a factor in stopping trade in the Red Sea, but the U.S. is not that dependent on trade in the Red Sea region. Yes, normatively, keeping the sea routes open is something that the U.S. Navy wants to do, and that's understandable because that is one of the prime reason the U.S. Navy was formed. But if you see the number of, the kind of trade that is happening in the Red Sea region, which is being affected by the Houthis, the Europeans are far more affected than the U.S. So whether Iran is a threat to the United States, one can draw the conclusion that it's not. It's a local power. It's a regional power. It is powerful enough to create some problem in the region, but directly to the U.S. strategic interest, no. The problem with the U.S. strategic interest in the region is U.S. is there. It shouldn't. It doesn't need. If it comes back from that region, the threat disappears.
Right. Even in the regional, it does. But I want to take a quick side tour off into your comment there that does Iran pose a threat to Israel? You said yes. I wonder if you could characterize that, because certainly because of the vast distance between them and the ability to project power, Iran certainly is never going to invade Israel. They certainly can't do that. They do have the missile capacity, which we have seen demonstrated that if they use it at scale, could certainly do some damage to Israel. But Israel has the trump card that no one likes to talk about, which is they do have nuclear weapons. Yeah. So doesn't that create deterrence just by the fact it exists? Ergo, there isn't really need to worry about going to any war against anybody?
No, I agree. I don't think we should go to war with Iran. Like, let's just put it that, as a categorical statement. I think war with Iran, especially with the United States, is going to be absolutely stupid. That it's not something which is in the interest of the United States or Iran or anyone in the region. You are right. Israel has a nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence is not very useful against non-state actors. So I think what I mean by Iranian threat to the Israel is Iran can, if it wants to, fund actors in the region which would be problematic for Israel. Does that mean that Iran wants to do it? Does that mean that there cannot be a local equilibrium between Iranians and the Israelis? Absolutely. Iran has got no capacity of invading Israel, as you mentioned. Its navy is primitive, and it has got missile power and has got drones that we have seen in Ukraine. Iranians have a good capacity of operationalizing defensive platforms because of their low labor cost. They can create small weapons which can be a lot of nuisance for a local country. But at scale, is Iran capable of invading and conquering the entire region? Probably not. So they can create a lot of problems for Israel by funding local actors or like having missile strikes, which would be a lot more problem for Israel if the US is not defending Israel, for example. As you saw in the last couple of times when the Iranian missiles were striking Israel, it was the US ships which were trying to stop them. Right. One can imagine without the US Navy, Israel would probably face a lot more Iranian missiles and it would be a lot more effective. But again, yes, it's a threat, but it's also a threat related to a local Israeli-Iranian balancing question. It's got nothing to do with...
Which certainly seems like that Iran and Israel could really manage and navigate this all. They don't need the United States. Obviously, Israel would be great if you had the use of the United States Armed Forces to bolster your defense, but it doesn't seem to me it's actually necessary. But then one would ask, and let's shift back to the nuclear issue, that
I want to add one thing that you mentioned right now. The fact that it could be argued that the fact that U.S. counts, the Israelis count on the United States as a guarantee that whatever happens, it's going to be the U.S. Navy defending them, also makes them a lot more reckless in a way. Balancing in international relations work when there is an equal balance. When one side in that balance is confident that it would have a benefactor, about to be there, regardless of the actions of one side, then that creates an imbalance, which is by definition not good for peace. So the U.S. treaty guarantee to Israel, or the U.S. guarantee to the Israeli peace, is in some ways making Israelis act in ways which it would probably not otherwise have acted.
Now, I think that's a very arguable position, which I happen to completely agree with, and I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it put to the test instead of just be a theoretical. I'd like to see how it actually works in principle. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon, based on yesterday's meeting with Netanyahu. And of course, at the heart of all of that yesterday was the Iran nuclear issue. And Trump said during this interview that he wants to make a nuclear deal, but there's a caveat.
I say this to Iran, who's listening very intently. I would love to be able to make a great deal, a deal where you can get on with your lives and you'll do wonderfully. You'll do wonderfully. Incredible people, industrious, beautiful, just an unbelievable group of people in Iran. And I know them well, have many friends from Iran and many friends that are Americans from Iran, and they're very proud of Iran. But I hated to do it, just so you understand. And I hope we're going to be able to do something so that it doesn't end up in a very catastrophic situation. I don't want to see that happen. I really want to see peace, and I hope that we're able to do that. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. I'm not putting restrictions. They cannot have one thing. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. And if I think that they will have a nuclear weapon, despite what I just said, I think that's going to be very unfortunate for them.
Okay, so far, U.S. intelligence, since I want to say like 2003 or something like that, has said, and this is again recently as 6 or 8 months ago, the last one I saw, that the Iranian regime has not made a decision to have a nuclear weapon. They have increased their capacity, and they could have a breakout in a very short period of time, but there has been no move to have a nuclear weapon. So if there hasn't been one, then what are you trying to make a deal to prevent them from having it if they haven't for decades? How do you see that part of the equation?
Right. I mean, some of that is a dynamic of domestic politics in a way. Like some of the things that Trump says in a press conference, he has to say that. Foreign policy is not detached of domestic considerations. Like Trump has to come and say that, yeah, we are not going to allow Iran to have nuclear weapons. Fair enough. I mean, that's something which, every U.S. president has to say. If they say something otherwise, then there would be a lot of controversy about that. I think his basic position from that press conference was clear. Look, there is one single absolute deliverable that we don't want to cross, is an Iranian rush to get an actual nuclear weapon. He even mentioned weapon, not nuclear power, which are different things. But right. Weaponizing your nuclear process is something that the U.S. government is disinclined to allow, to put it in a diplomatic way. That could be interpreted in a lot of ways, but it also gives a very simple red line to Iran. Like, look, man, do whatever you want to. We want to have a deal with you. We want to have good relations with you. We have Iranians in the U.S. who wants to have good relations with Iran. We don't want to go to war. Just don't rush for weapons. I think the Iranians, if they were smart, they're going to be pretty happy about this press conference and say, like, yeah, that is something which we are not planning to do anyway. This is kind of like tariffs on Canada and Mexico. The Canadians are like, yeah, fine, we are going to send 10,000 troops in the border, and the tariffs are gone. Some of it is, as we call, posturing in a way, like posturing before a negotiation. Like you kind of like put your cards on the table and say, like, these are my red lines, these are what we do. It's the same thing that he might want to do with Russia as well. Like, look, these are my red lines in Ukraine, and don't cross that, and we can have a deal. I think his instinct is not to go to war with Iran. I think he understands at the core, and he's surrounded by people, including the vice president and the forthcoming ODNI and some other people who are not inclined to go to war with Iran. So, I mean, that's a hopeful situation, I think. And I think the president can carry through. I think if things go well. Sorry,
I was going to say, isn't there though some contradiction in the context of the single press conference which we're talking about here? On the one hand, he just said all this flowery stuff at the first of that clip there about how they're wonderful people. He wants to make a deal. He wants to have freedom and peace and all this kind of stuff. Yet previously he just signed that memorandum there for maximum pressure. I mean, even taking the nuclear part out, those things seem to be, I don't see how those things are compatible.
I mean, it's an executive order, so it can be taken back in a way. Like the optimistic scenario of this case is the president will sign an executive order, which brings back maximum pressure, but he's going to signal verbally, which he's doing, that he doesn't want to go to war with Iran, and he loathes to do this. The Iranians are going to get that hint. They're going to send a back channel to the United States to talk about it. There might be some deliverables and tangible negotiation that might happen. The Iranians are going to compromise on some issues. The United States is going to compromise on some issues. And there's going to be a better deal than JCPOA, the best deal that Trump can ever have. And he can then sell it to the American people. Like, that's the optimistic scenario. The moderate scenario in this case is like that while that is happening, there are other contingent factors in the Middle East, which then creates a situation where the Iranians and the Israelis
that's exactly what I wanted to say, because if it was only the U.S. and Iran, I would be a little bit more optimistic.
Right.
In that same conference, Benjamin Netanyahu put this spin on it.
And also,
we also see eye to eye on Iran. That's the same Iran that tried to kill us both. They tried to kill you, Mr. President. They tried through their proxies to kill me. And we're both committed to rolling back Iran's aggression in the region and ensuring that Iran never develops a nuclear weapon. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Israel will end the war by winning the war. Israel's victory will be America's victory. We will not only win the war, working together, we will win the peace.
He seemed to imply there that in context with Iran, that we will end the war by winning the war. It was kind of bleeding over. Is he talking about Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran, or is he thinking of all three of them? He seemed to think about he wants to defeat Iran, not to just get along with them. How do you see that?
I agree. I mean, what does winning even mean in this context? Like, define winning. Like, who are we fighting? First of all, the idea that Israeli victory is U.S. victory is absolute nonsense. There's nothing, we are not, the U.S. is not at war with Hezbollah, for example. Like, it's not, it's just not. Like, no matter how many times the Israelis try and like show that this is the same kind of, confrontation that we are facing, it's not. Obviously, now the Israelis are treaty allies. Now, it creates some kind of obligations on the part of the United States to come to their defense. Understandable. But that statement was, it was so over the, all over the place. It was, on one hand, he was saying like he's going to win the war, and then he's saying he's going to act together and win the peace. Who's he fighting, whether it's Iran or Hamas? What does winning even mean in this context? Hamas is not going to be obliterated. They're still in Gaza. There are 2 million people who are going to be there. It's just, it's a way of buttering the U.S. president, and I don't think that was working very well. I think President Trump's body language was kind of like, he was tired of that.
Yeah, it does seem that way. But how do you think that's going to work out with the issue of how the whole conflict in the region is going to work out? Because I don't want to go too much into this at the moment here, but the context of Trump saying, yeah, we'll take over the Gaza Strip. Will help take care of that issue. And Netanyahu puts them all together because he later on talked about, we are in a 7-front war. That's one of them. So he seems like he wants to keep us involved in all of that. How does Trump avoid getting involved in all of those things and still just make sure that the treaty allies are taken care of, but also American national interests are taken care of?
Right. I mean, the American national interest is, one, completely avoid any kind of confrontation in the Middle East. So that is something which Trump probably understands, but he probably needs to be reminded time to time. Like, he's just like, someone has to keep saying to him, like, yeah, listen, you were elected as a peace president. You don't want to go to war in the Middle East. It doesn't matter. We are not a police force in Gaza. We are not going to clean up Gaza just to create a beachfront property. That's not going to happen, first of all. Second, all the Abraham Accords you talk about, all the Arabs who are worshiping Trump and they like you, they're all going to hate you if you try and do that. your greatest legacy of the first term that you constantly showcase, Abraham Accords. Look, the Saudi-Israeli peace deal. Look, the Jordanians and the Qataris loving me. It's all going to disappear tomorrow if you try and create a beachfront property in Gaza. So forget about what he's doing. I think the best thing that could be done is something. I mean, it's still too early. Like it's early days of the administration, so we can't really predict. I also don't really understand what he wants to do in Gaza. But I think we could be cautiously optimistic because some of the people who are surrounding him probably don't really want to go that much or intervene in the Middle East. I think one of the things that he needs to keep in mind is the Arabs are not going to take Palestinians. They're not going to take 2 million Palestinians as refugees. There might not be a two-state solution in the horizon yet, but there needs to be some kind of equilibrium where the Palestinians live in Gaza peacefully with the Israelis. It is not a problem of the United States. The fundamental problem in Gaza is a political problem between the Israelis and Palestinians. It's not a real estate deal that you can just you're not looking at a train station and as my friend Justin Logan wrote, it's not like something that you can just build something there because it's completely empty and vacant. There is underlying all of that is a political problem of people who are living in that region. As long as they don't come to a peaceful solution, we can't really do much anyway. Best to stay off.
Yeah. And to your point there a second ago that you just made about the body language of Trump and Netanyahu, especially on that issue with the nuclear power issue and maybe going to war with Iran. I think it was actually subsequent to that Trump published on Truth Social a comment talking about that. Gary, if you can toss that up there. He said, I want Iran to be a great and successful country, but one that cannot have nuclear weapons. Reports that U.S. is working in conjunction with Israel is going to blow Iran to smithereens are greatly exaggerated. I would prefer a verified nuclear peace agreement, etc. So based on that, I mean, what do you think the chances are that Trump actually would like to have some kind of a new, you guess you can't call it JCPOA because that's tied to the Obama legacy, but some kind of an agreement that would lower the tensions?
If I was advising President Trump on Middle East, I would tell him three things. One, your legacy is a peace president. Two, you want to be remembered as someone who didn't take the U.S. to war. And three, one of your legacies could be a good deal with Iran. You want to do that. So figure out what you want in return. If these are the things you want in return, then of those things, these are the things that you could achieve, and these are the things that are never going to happen. So whoever is advising the president in the Middle East, if you're listening to this conversation, make sure you make him understand that some of the things that he's being told to do are not ever going to happen, or even if it happens, it's not going to be beneficial to the United States. There is a chance of having a good deal with Iran. It need not be named as JCPOA because you're absolutely right. It's tied to the Obama legacy. And I don't think Trump even wants to give Iran too much money and not getting anything in return. He's not that. He's a more transactional guy anyway. But there needs to be some kind of deal which he can then sell to the American people that this is something which he created and that's his legacy of peace.
Yeah, and I think that certainly he's capable of doing that. I don't think there'll be too much difficulty, at least among his supporters. If he characterizes something that says it's a good deal, I think they'll certainly agree with it. And yeah, I'm all about that. Anything that lowers the tensions and reduces the chance that anybody goes to war there, I think is a good thing, both for the United States and the region. One of the other things that Trump has also talked about here recently, being reported by NBC News this morning, is that he says he's actually considering, and apparently the Pentagon is now working on a plan to get U.S. troops out of Syria. Now, this is something I have been really harping on since 2018, that they have done nothing but serve as a point of strategic vulnerability. So I'm all for this. What do you make of this, and do you think that that they're actually going to do it?
I think this is a completely testable, idea of where Trump's instincts lie. I think if he can do that, which he tried to do in the first, in his first term, by the way, he got slow rolled by the Pentagon. But
right, and this is the point, in case anybody might not realize, he's on three separate occasions in his first term, he said he was going to get the troops out of Syria. And on one of them in particular, one of the biggest roadblocks came from then Secretary of Defense James Mattis, who resigned over the issue.
That's right.
No, and of course he unfortunately he backed down from that. But as you said, he's surrounded by different people this time. So do you think it might happen?
I think it might happen. I think there's a huge opportunity of Trump actually following through. The tragedy of the first term of Trump administration was that in two cases he was completely right, but he couldn't follow through. One was Syria, as you mentioned. Mattis even resigned. The second, he was the one who started the negotiation in Afghanistan for a troop withdrawal, which was extremely successful. He couldn't end it before his term. If he could have done that, he would have been known as the president. The Pentagon had 3 years to prepare for a troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. It didn't do it because it was hoping that Biden is going to come and reverse it, but it didn't obviously happen.
Well, actually, even before that, just like Mattis kind of, for whatever reason, was able to change Trump's mind, Trump actually had an order to be withdrawn from Afghanistan before he left on his first term there. And Mark Milley, along with the acting Secretary of Defense, went to him and convinced him to keep, a token number of troops. And then I'm 100% sure that you're right. They hoped that Biden would undo it, so they took no more action. And then we see how that worked out. So
and Biden came and said, like, we're going to move troops away, and it was like 3 months to prepare. And obviously that was like a terrible, terrible, scenario. So I think Trump this time is surrounded by people and his team, especially in the NSC's Middle East desk. Some of the people we know are working there, and they're really good. So there is there is a chance that Trump is going to follow through his troop withdrawal. I mean, that would be a major effect. Putting 900 troops in Syria is not beneficial to the United States. It doesn't do much, it actually attracts more and more problem for the United States. There's a risk of chain ganging in a war in the Middle East because of attacks on those troops. I think moving them out of Syria would be a good start to his term.
And let me ask you, just before we came on the air, you were telling me about some paper that you had co-authored with a man who now is one of the senior advisors to the Secretary of Defense about force posture in the region. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So this is it's a policy memo that Dan Caldwell and I wrote a while back about force posture in the Middle East, where we showed that up until Nixon, it was a very different force posture in the Middle East, and only after Jimmy Carter came, there was this massive expansion, and then obviously another set of expansion happened in the Clinton era, and then George W. Bush came and started the 9/11 wars. We just showed in the paper that we can go back to the Nixon era force posture in the Middle East. Basically, the idea is you can have a fleet which is based in Bahrain, and you can have over-the-horizon capabilities from Turkey. But other than that, you don't need to have any fixed number of troops as a forward positioning in the region, in the Middle East. The Americans have a local equilibrium, which is already happening there between the Arabs and the Israelis, and we can lean onto that one. The Americans don't really want to go to war with Iran, and there could be a good deal to have with Iran. And you can move troops out of Iraq and Syria now that ISIS is decimated. And even if ISIS comes back, there are over-the-horizon capabilities that U.S. can use without actually positioning troops in the ground. If there needs to be a war, we should rely on local troops to take most of the burden instead of putting American boots on the ground. That was the basic of the policy brief that he and I wrote, and I think it's still valid. I think Trump administration might want to think about what kind of change Trump is constantly, considered to be the new Nixon. Like, one of the things from Nixon he can actually learn was Nixon's force posture in the Middle East.
And what do you say to the people who have just reflexively pushed back against this, going back to Mattis and all the way through? Any talk, especially among senior Pentagon officials, about withdrawing people always gets this thing that, okay, you're going to be making a vacuum. It's going to be taken over by China or Russia or Iran, all these other kind of people. How do you address that question or that challenge?
Well, the Iran thing we already discussed. It's one thing to imagine Iran to be a massive threat in the region, but if you actually calculate the Iranian aggregate power, it's nothing compared to they're flying F-15s, F-4s, and it's the Iranian Navy is a joke. Like they don't have the money to follow through to be a regional hegemon. As for Russia and China, it would be a curse if Russia and China gets to be a hegemon in the Middle East. If we were living in the 19th century, we would probably make it a point to ensure that the Russians and the Chinese eat up Middle East, and then that is going to be their burden. We don't do politics like that anymore. That was more cynical and realist in the 19th century. But if we are genuinely thinking as a great power, we would want the Russians and the Chinese to be in the Middle East so that they can face all the problems that there is. They can have their clients fighting against each other, and they can face terrorist attacks, providing order in the region. We don't have to do that. The Middle East is not a region which is existential to U.S. interests. Asia, yes. Western Europe, maybe. Middle East, absolutely not.
And how would you characterize the balances of power among? Well, actually, no. A better question is, in terms of the balance of power, is it a net plus or a net negative to the U.S. the fact that Saudi Arabia and Iran seem to be trying to move into rapprochement?
I think it's a good thing. I think the idea of Abraham Accord was that there would be a local balancing coalition which would balance Iran. That was 7 or 8 years back. Iran is a shadow of what it was even then. It is. We have only seen a decimation of it, Iranian proxies in the region. If, due to the Israeli war in Gaza, the Saudis and Iranians come together in a rapprochement, which means one of the major axes of confrontation, the Sunnis and the Shias, the tone of the confrontation goes down. Like there is a decline in a risk. In any event, that is a benefit to the United States. If there is a natural equilibrium that is being created in the region due to any number of circumstantial causes, I think that's good for the United States. I think the less there is a risk of a war in that region, the better for us. And I think we should encourage the Saudis and the Iranians to come together and have a detente.
Well, I certainly am in agreement with that as well. And as long as the Trump administration keeps its focus, which was also a signed executive order that there is an American first foreign policy, then we should be taking all these actions which improve our national security. And I would admire, or rather suggest that they listen to that report that you and Dan Caldwell wrote and use that as a roadmap for what they can do, because I think that would be a lot of benefit to the country. But listen, we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate you writing that article, and look forward to having you back on again real soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
And appreciate that, and appreciate you guys too. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that on the way out. Also, this afternoon, we're going to look with Ambassador Chaz Freeman at the other, maybe even bigger portion of that press conference and engagement with Prime Minister Netanyahu about whether Trump would, quote, own the Gaza Strip and what that would all mean. That's going to be you're not going to want to miss that one, I promise you. Ambassador Freeman has a lot to say on that and is an expert from the region. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.